To me, mindset and warrior go hand in hand. Think about two of the most important things that happen throughout the course of the day: stimulus and our response. And the space between those two is where I choose to be a warrior. That's where mindset lives. It's the space between stimulus and response. I cannot choose, I cannot control the stimulus, but I most certainly can control the response. And for me, waking up each day and choosing to be a warrior is saying, I'm going to master that space. And the response will be not only my control, I will control that, but I will also take responsibility for that.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo podcast, where we bring you interviews and topics to help you live well and swim well. Conversations especially meaningful for masters swimmers and anyone striving to perform better in the water or in life. We're here to champion you. And now your host, Kelly Pallas.
Hello, friends. Today, we're diving into the mind of a man who has trained elite warriors, special forces operators, and top performers around the world to perform under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Chris Harris, known as the Warrior Maker, is a U.S. military veteran, Martial Arts Hall of Fame inductee, best-selling author, and mindset expert who has spent decades teaching discipline, focus, and execution when the stakes are highest. From training close quarters combat to coaching leaders and athletes, Chris has had one core message: either you master yourself or pressure will master you. Today, we're going to explore how this battlefield-tested mindset applies directly to athletes, especially master swimmers who want to stay sharp, resilient, and competitive for life. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. I'm excited.
Yes. How did you learn that you had this special gift to really help people under pressure? What was that turning point moment for you?
I think it started for me. I was about 12 years old and I was homeless, and I was digging through the dumpster looking for food, and I found a bag of donuts. And I was really excited because they were still in the bag and unopened, and they were protected. And I was sitting on the curb eating the donuts, and I just all of a sudden just had this moment. And I just there has to be more for me than this, and I'm better than this, and I'm not going to settle for this. And I just kind of had this conversation like with me and the universe as a 12-year-old. And I really started making some soul binding ties right then and there about what I was going to settle for. And I'm willing to do the work, whatever it takes to improve my situation. But I also made another proclamation. I was frustrated that there weren't people helping me. And I'm not going to say it was entitlement or self-pity. It was just a lack of understanding. I didn't understand why people weren't helping me. And so, my mother was in prison. She was a heroin addict who got caught dealing. Both of my sisters were in child protective services, so we never lived under the same roof after we were separated. And so as part of that proclamation, I said, when I figure this out, and I will figure it out, I'm going to throw down the rope. And that has been my mission. And, as a young man, I've always known that I was put on this earth to protect the innocent and to safeguard the helpless. And so at 18, I joined the military. And then after serving for 4 years, I got out of the military, and then I started training elite special forces, which I did for 25 years as a private contractor. And that was when I really learned the mindset piece. They are the epitome of just mentally tough. I mean, when you think of mindset, think of Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Delta Force. I mean, they live in this world. And so for those 25 years, I'm teaching them, but I'm learning just as much, maybe more than what I was actually training them. And then I pivoted in my 40s, I pivoted into corporate America. And I had such a tremendous advantage because I had 25 years of this mindset piece. And then, of course, I had these declarations that I made as a 12-year-old boy. And I just really thrived. And I thought, all right, I have got to share this. There are a lot of people out there who just feel stuck and they don't know what to do. And I know what to do. And I want to teach them what to do because there's room for all of us at the top.
Yes, I love that. Sending down the rope, giving somebody a hand up. Your nickname, the Warrior Maker. I'd like to talk a little bit about
So
warrior as it's defined, but just in general.
a lot of the work that I did, it was all for the US or US allies. And a lot of it was in the Middle East, probably 80%. And the thing with Middle Eastern, military leaders and members of the royal family, when it comes to, hiring what they consider to be the best, to train what they consider to be their best, they're not interested in press releases, trophies, accolades, websites, uh, testimonials. They don't care about any of that. They don't believe it. They think it all can be bought. It can be fabricated. So if they're going to basically take someone to put them in front of their elite soldiers, and so my specialty was elite close quarters combat, barehanded combat, and so I had to fight. I mean, if I wanted the contract, I would be invited, me and a couple of others from around the world, and we would have to fight whoever that existing master combatives instructor was, whose contract was coming to an end, and they weren't going to renew it unless that person could prove they were still the best. And so I was over in the Middle East, and it was time to fight. And if I won, then I would win the contract, and if I lost, I would have an 8,000-mile trip home, busted up, with a $5,000 American Express bill. So, but anyway, the only way to win is either the other person is, you either knock them out, they pass out from lack of oxygen, or one of the senior leaders in the room, probably the most senior authority in the room, would stop it and say, "Stop! I've seen enough. You've clearly won decisively." And so I was doing that, and I basically won, and I won the contract. But the person in that room, the senior leader, stood up and said, "Stop," and he said, "You are clearly the warrior maker, and we want you to make our warriors better." And that it just stuck. I was, from that point on, I was the warrior maker, and they started calling me the warrior maker. And then, and the other Arab Gulf states, they were all very closely connected. So Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, and they just started calling me that. And I didn't really come to appreciate that until I really got into kind of being an influencer and a keynote speaker, because there are 300 famous Chris Harrises. And if you Google Chris Harris, I don't care what I've accomplished. I mean, I'm like on page 10. There's just so many famous Chris Harrises. But if you Google the Warrior Maker, it's me. So I really came to appreciate that when I needed to be able to be found. So anyway, that's how that.
Yes. And warrior it's such a great word because one doesn't have to be on the battlefield. Every day in life, we all take on little wars, from our own negative thoughts to battling an illness. I talk a lot on this podcast about going through topical steroid withdrawal, and we call ourselves skin warriors. What advice would you give to us everyday warriors out here?
Well, I would say that, so my definition of the word warrior is a little bit different than, probably what we see on TV or read in social media. Most people immediately think, combative, or protective. And that's not how I view the word. To me, mindset and warrior go hand in hand. It's the space that occupies think about two of the most important things that happen throughout the course of the day: stimulus and our response. And the space between those two is where I choose to be a warrior. That's where mindset lives. It's the space between stimulus and response. I cannot control the stimulus, but I most certainly can control the response. And for me, waking up each day and choosing to be a warrior is saying, I'm going to master that space, and the response will be not only my control, I will control that, but I will also take responsibility for that.
Oh, that's so powerful and so timely because when we have these things that stress us out in life, whether it's literally something related to one's job or whether it's stress with the performance you're trying to do as an athlete. Give you a small example of just my last 15 minutes before we started to record this show. I manage real estate and we have an infestation of bees in a shed at a property. And I don't want to just send the local pest control person out there to kill the bees because bees are so important to our environment. So I called around to some professional beekeepers and they'll come out to your house and they'll relocate the bees. Well, there is a really gigantic price tag attached to this. And I the stimulus was, oh my gosh, I don't want to kill these bees, but I have to relocate the bees and it's so expensive. And I was really having a meltdown right before we got together. But that applies so much to whatever, whether it's bees in your shed to being behind the blocks, knowing that I want to do this performance. So it's the stimulus, the response. How do we slow that space down?
I'll give you an example. If someone asks you a question and you're standing here and they ask you and there's other people standing around and they all look and they look at you to see your response. We feel this pressure to respond within a certain amount of time, right? Otherwise, we're inviting awkward silence. But why do we need to respond within a certain amount of time? Why can't we just slow it down? And, so the first thing we have to do is we have to remove our need for anyone else's approval. All right. The only two people we ever have to impress in our lifetime is the 8-year-old version of myself and the 80-year-old version of myself. That's it. And when I come to that place, then I have no problem slowing things down, even if it means disappointing the person who asked me the question. So first and foremost, pick the pace that works best for you. And the second thing is metacognition. Metacognition is probably the most powerful tool that we have in our toolbox for controlling that space. And it's like awareness, but it's 10 times more important than awareness. Alan Watts, a famous British philosopher, said this, and it's one of my favorite quotes. We are under no obligation to be the same version of ourselves we was 5 minutes ago. So anytime that stimulus hits me, this is what a warrior says. It may not turn out okay, but I'm going to be okay. And, so the situation with your bees, for example, this may not, but at the end of the day, Kelly, you're going to be okay. And we start with that. And then somewhere in the background is the only two people I need to ever impress is 8-year-old version of Kelly and 80-year-old version of Kelly. And everyone else can wait because I master this space. So it starts with just understanding what the stakes are. And that's 8-year-old and 80-year-old. That's the stakes. And then it comes into more than awareness. It's hyper awareness, which is metacognition, which is basically, I'm going to slow this down to the point to where I am going to learn and make micro adjustments in the moment. And by the time I do respond, I will be a better version of myself because of the way I chose to respond. I will be a better version of myself than I was 5 minutes ago. And we just live like this in this Kaizen, constant state of perpetual improvement. But we own that space, and that's how we control that space.
So I'm so glad you talked about metacognition. That's a real buzzword right now in the sports performance space. Let me tell you how I understand it. It's being aware of your own thinking and analyzing your own thinking, where I used to not even be able to do that. I've done this work through dealing with anxiety, just having anxiety. I'm feeling anxiety because this is what I'm thinking. What am I thinking? This is what I'm thinking. And then, I'm aware of what I'm thinking. Am I describing metacognition correctly there?
You most certainly are. If you think about it from the standpoint that there's a lot of our life, 95% of our day, right, is on autopilot. I mean, the fact that you're blinking, you're inhaling, you're exhaling, your heart rate, your blood pressure, all of these things, um, they're happening automatically, and they're in the subconscious portion of your mind, which is the 95%. Only 5%. If we were to look at our bodies, our beings, physical, mental, and spiritual, if we were to look at them as a computer, the 5% that happens in the conscious mind is nothing more than it's the screen, the speakers, the video, the mouse, the keyboard. But the hard drive, okay, that's the operating system. That's the 95%. And most of that is on autopilot. So metacognition is choosing what you want to take off of autopilot. Because if it's on autopilot, it's taking into consideration pain, fear, anxiety, past hurts. It's looking at all of it, and it's making instinctive automatic reactions on your behalf based on some of the worst experiences you've ever had. It's not really making those decisions based on the best experiences you've ever had. And so this is our power. We want to basically use metacognition to identify automatic behaviors and responses that are no longer useful. They no longer serve us. And the way that we do this, we have to be very mindful of the fact that there is a mental firewall that lives between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. It's called our critical faculty, but I call it critical Carl. He's this, metaphorically, he's this 7-foot, 400-pound, muscle bound bodyguard. And he stands at the gate, the only entrance to your subconscious mind. And he is not going to let anything in if it feels unsafe or unfamiliar. This is why when we set new goals, we try to get rid of old habits. We try to create new habits. This is why a lot of times we eventually just revert back because we didn't get past critical Carl. He gave us temporary access because we used a fake ID. We had a lot of self-motivation, and we established these really good goals, and we surrounded ourselves with a network of people who would hold us accountable. And we had a lot of willpower at the time, and we were doing positive self-talk and NLP and all of these wonderful things. But to Carl, if it's not a repetitive pattern that's fueled by emotion and that is attached with like visual imagery, he's not buying it, and it's not going to stick. So when I think about my thinking, which is how I define metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, what I'm really doing is I'm trying to identify any automatic behavior that no longer serves me. And then I know how to get past critical Carl. And that's what I teach people who want to improve their performance. I teach you how to get past critical Carl. Because if you don't get into the subconscious layer, you're not changing anything, at least not permanently.
How do we get past critical Carl?
So there's a couple of ways. One is through meditation. So what it really is we're in the wrong brainwave, right? Our analytical brain is pretty much critical Carl, and it's running 100 miles a minute. So we really need to get into our theta state, and that's the state that, like, when you lay down at night and you're about to go to bed, you're getting ready to go to sleep, and it's those few moments before you doze off. That's when you're in your theta waves, and that's when critical Carl is basically went to take a break. Okay. And so that's a very important moment. That's like a golden moment. We can do a lot right there if it's intentional and it's planned and it's repetitive. Another thing, this is why people engage in hypnosis, because hypnosis basically puts you in your theta state. NLP is effective, but NLP takes a long time. So for people who want like change now, that's why a lot of people will say, well, I'm just going to go do hypnotherapy because I don't have time for retraining my entire language and learning to reframe, every time I say the word can't, so that takes a lot of time. So there's meditation, there's NLP, there's meditation. Neville Goddard came up with just a really great way that I've been using for years successfully. And he calls it the the state akin to sleep. And that is basically just before you fall asleep, you mentally play, it's just some positive things, right? But I actually created a method that works really well it's for people who look, I'm not going to sit down, crisscross applesauce and meditate. I'm not going to do it. A lot of my buddies would laugh at the thought of meditation. They're just, they can't even sit in that position, let alone be still for 5 minutes. A lot of people are not going to go through hypnosis. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with that. I don't have any opinions of it just because I've never done it. And then the thing with, the state akin to sleep, Neville Goddard's method, which I think is wonderful, and I've had tremendous results, but we only go to sleep about once a day, and if we think about what really impacts the subconscious mind and gets critical Carl out of the way, it's repetition, and it needs to have like emotion and visualization attached to it. That is what the subconscious really responds to. And so I created a method called Metacue, Metacue. And it's for people who aren't going to do the other things, but they want change right now. So what I do is I say, all right, I want you to create in your mind a desired outcome. Okay. And it doesn't really matter what the desired outcome is. So I'll just give an example. I have always wanted a red convertible Porsche with white leather interior. And I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to take on a second job, and I'm be very disciplined at saving my money. And I'm going to get that car. Okay, great. And I just use that example because it's very vivid, right? People can imagine driving on a beautiful day in a red convertible Porsche with white leather interior. All right. So you that's one, your desired outcome. Number two is now you create a 5-second video of a future memory. Okay. And it needs to be really detailed. This is where the emotion comes in, because we need repetition with emotion, and emotion loves visualization. Okay. And so imagine yourself just in that 5-second clip of you driving on a beautiful day. You're observing yourself. You're standing on the side of watching yourself go by in that car on a beautiful day, sitting in the driver's seat. And as it goes by, you can smell that new car payment smell, that leather. And okay, so there's your 5-second scene. So the third thing you do is now you make a statement of gratitude. And a statement of gratitude is very important. And I'll tell you why. So it basically says, I am so grateful for my red convertible Porsche. I love that car. I'm just so grateful for it. And you can say it because gratitude assumes that it has happened. It's an assumption that it has happened. It's not wishful thinking, right? When we're grateful for what has happened. And so that's it. My desired outcome, my little 5-second scene, and then my statement of gratitude, even if I say it under my breath. And then now the last step is we create the cue. And we need a cue that is automatic, it's habitual, and it happens a lot. Okay. So for me, if I'm really serious, like I want change now, my cue will be every time I pick up my phone. Okay. Now think about this for a second. The average American checks their phone 93 times a day. So can you imagine 93 times today, I am going to, for just 5 seconds, imagine me in that beautiful car, beautiful day. And then I say, I'm so grateful for my red convertible Porsche. And now all of a sudden we will wear critical Carl down. And it's just repetition 93 times a day. You could say every time I sit, that's my cue. Every time I stand, every time I walk through a doorway, every time I open or shut something, it can be whatever you want. Every time I take a drink of any liquid. But not only do you get the repetition and visualization and the emotional charge and the gratitude that all happens in a microsecond, but more importantly than that, or at least equally as important as that, is you're training your metacognition, which is one of the most valuable tools you have, because you're forcing yourself every time you pick up that phone, you're thinking about what you're thinking, and you're interrupting autopilot, and you're inserting something new that is now useful for you. And it works.
That is fantastic. I was fortunate enough to go to the Olympic Training Center, and they did relaxation, visualization, all of that. But the cue, adding that cue is really outstanding. That's a great way to organize it for
And
everyone. I love
and
that.
and Kelly, another really nice thing about the Metacue method is, like, currently right now, I have 3 very important desired outcomes, and I have assigned a different cue to each of the 3. They all
Mm.
have their own video. They all have their own gratitude statement. And so, and they all happen pretty frequently throughout the day. But I've got 3 things going on. And what happens is, one of the questions I get from people is, well, how long do I do this? Is it 30 days or 60 days? You do it to where you no longer need the cue to remind you to do it. When it becomes automatic, then basically Critical Carl has stepped aside and he has given you access to the other side of the red velvet ropes. You have created a new neural pathway.
That's fantastic. I want to talk about resilience. And one of the things that I have heard from a lot of different swimmers, like, can you talk about this? Can you talk about that? But it all comes under the same heading of setbacks and hitting things from plateaus in your performance to injuries. What separates those people who come back stronger from those who don't?
Well, you can't talk about resilience or overcoming adversity or developing that indomitable spirit or grit mentality. Like, they're all in the same, you know, they all live in the same house, and you can't talk about them without talking about knowing your why. Um, because knowing your why as it relates to that specific desired outcome, okay, that's where resilience comes from. That's where indomitable, that's where grit, that's where overcoming adversity, that's where choosing the better perspective. All of that comes from, look, your why is what grit and resilience attach their teeth to. How big is your why? If it's important enough to us, we fight through it.
What are hidden rivals for competitive swimmers?
Elite athletes, and I can say this because I've worked with a lot of professional athletes, okay, who just whatever were in a slump or were trying to make it to maybe they were second string and they wanted to make it to starting. And even though you might be playing for the NFL, but you're sitting the bench, so to that person, that's a big deal. And I would say that inner rivals, first and foremost, you have to be very aware of what it is you're trying to prove and who you're trying to prove it to. I've always thought that the athletes that performed at the highest level were ones who were extremely competitive with themselves. The ones who are competing against the person next to them, I don't think will ever have the same competitive advantage as the person who's competing at that same level with themselves. And when we compete with ourselves, we're competing with our ego. We need to understand. So ego, anytime we use the word I, it's our ego talking about itself. Okay, our ego is our identity. And I don't believe that it's our enemy. I believe it most certainly can be our enemy. If our ego turns on us, watch out. That's when we go beyond confidence and we shift into arrogance and conceit and cockiness and the person nobody wants to be around. That's ego going into protective mode. So if you're trying to shift your identity and your ego is not ready for that shift, it becomes protective ego. And that's where it becomes cocky, arrogant, self-centered, ugly. Okay. Blame comes from overly protective ego, not taking ownership, argumentative, closed-mindedness. All of these things are the result of that ego being out of check. And it's out of check because it's resisting the identity shift that is inevitable. So I would say for athletes, I would first say, well, who are you competing against? Are you competing in the person to the lane in the lane next to you? Are you competing against yourself? or your own ego, which that's probably the best one you can compete with, or are you competing with all of the people who told you you'd never make it this far? And there's no wrong answer, but look, the only way we can ever defeat our inner rivals is first and foremost, we have to be aware of what they are. And then secondly, once we become aware of what our greatest rival is, whether it's fear or ego, or, what have you, then the next thing we have to do is we have to come to a place of acceptance. Okay. I cannot heal it's something if I don't accept it, right? Acknowledge it and accept it. So one, be aware of what your greatest ego is. I can tell you what mine was. Um, you know, I, uh, I never had approval. I was born in adversity and I was raised in rejection. And so I just never had anyone say, good job, or I love you, or you're enough. So when I learned that I had this gift, I literally had a gift of martial arts. Like you could teach me something and I mean, like I could just replay it back to you real time. And when you compile that gift, where you combine that gift with my work ethic, I was willing to be the first one there, the last one to leave. I trained 5 to 6 hours a day, every day, even if I was injured. But I did it for the wrong reasons. I did it because I wanted the praise of man. I wanted approval. I want people to. I wanted them to respect me. And I learned at an early age, if men think you're dangerous, and you are dangerous, they respect you. Now, it's a little messed up. Now, here I am in my 50s saying this, but I was addicted to that. So the better I got, the more dangerous I became, the more respect they would extend to me. And so basically what I was doing is I was performing at a super high level because I was insecure and I needed approval. And it was the only way I knew how to get it. Once I realized that that was basically my greatest inner rival was my insecurity, my fear of not being enough. I didn't stop doing martial arts. I just changed my why. Changed the reason I was doing it. I didn't stop training hard. Didn't stop trying to be the best. I didn't stop with my goal to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. All of that was still on the table. The only thing I changed was why I was doing it. And I made the decision that I'm going to be great, but just for a different reason now. So when these elite swimmers when they're very clear about their why, then they can be very clear and truthful about what is my greatest rival, right? My inner adversary, and then come to a place of acceptance. It was very hard for me to accept the fact, as good as I was. I mean, I was one of the top in the world at what I did. And for me to have to look in the mirror and admit that I became this good because I was just like an insecure little boy inside, that was very hard for me to accept that. And so, it all starts with, to thine own self be true.
Yes. And it sounds like it also circles heavily back to metacognition,
You're
just
thinking about what you're thinking.
knowing what you're thinking, your why and your ego. All right, Chris, second to last question. If you have 10 seconds with a master swimmer behind the block before they are about to go chase a personal best, what would you say to them in 10 seconds?
I would say, walk me through your future scene. I want you to tell me that 5-second scene that we create, like our meta cue. I want you to walk me through that scene. I want to hear your future memory of you after you've already won. Explain that with vivid details.
That might be hard for me because my race is like 20 minutes long, but I know where you're going with that. It's good advice. What do you see at the end of this?
But after you've won, you could certainly tell me what 5 seconds looked like. If those 5 seconds only would happen if you won first place, you could tell me what those 5 seconds looked like.
Sure. Yeah. The end of the race, like the celebration at the end when you see that time up there. I think for most people, it's not about the place as much as it is about the time.
I was having a conversation with an NFL kicker, pro NFL kicker, 9 years. We were having this conversation just a few days ago. And so everyone who's an elite athlete, they have a different stimulus and response. Okay. So his stimulus began when the ball was hiked. Okay. And then the response was him moving toward the ball to kick that extra point, or moving toward the ball to kick that field goal. So stimulus, the ball was hiked, and then there was a few seconds, not even really a few seconds, before he actually made contact with the ball. That was his response. So in martial arts, the stimulus is when the person starts to even flinch towards you. Like their hands could be down by their side, but when they make that move towards you, could be turning their foot, whatever. And then the response is when they're basically on the ground and they've been subdued. Okay. So with swimming, it's a much different scenario, because the distance between the stimulus, like when they say go, and the response, which is when you finish the race, that's a lot of space, right? And so that's where we really have to create automation, right? We create a process to where that automation is taking place for those 20 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. So this is where automation becomes very important. And so 20 minutes is a long time. I don't know if I'm qualified to speak about 20 minutes between a stimulus and a response.
Actually, you're speaking quite eloquently and accurately, because it does need to be automated. And it really is the hardest one. Most people don't swim 20-minute races. Most people swim 30-second races or minute races or 2-minute races. But for the people that swim the longer stuff, it is exactly that. It is controlling that space for 20 minutes, because if you don't, you totally will spiral and you will have a horrible race. And so what I've learned over, 50 years of being a swimmer in
Wow.
the 20-minute space is exactly that I have to sing a song, because I'm controlling that space. Instead of thinking about the pain, I'm singing a song, or I'm focusing purely on technique or my turns or my breathing. I'm counting how many strokes I'm taking per length, but I'm not allowing critical Carl to come in and say, you really are feeling tired. Why don't you slow down? It would feel much better if you just slowed down a little bit, because there's always that voice. So I think that's perfectly accurate to say there's a stimulus, there's a response. And boy, the longer, it's absolutely known within endurance sports that it's that mindset in distance races that will just crush you if you don't have control over it.
Yeah, in close quarters combat, we call it OODA, OODA. It's called the OODA loop, and not just close quarters combat in military. They teach it in dogfighting in the air. But OODA is OODA. We observe, we orientate, we decide, and we act. Observe, orientate, decide, and act. So in close quarters combat, that whole process takes less than 2 seconds from the time the physical altercation begins until the other person is either subdued, controlled, restrained, whatever. It's less than 2 seconds. And so I live in an OODA loop of 2 seconds. You live in an OODA loop of 20 minutes. But at the end of the day, as elite performers, what we have to do is the observe, that's the first O, and then the act at the very end. Those we want always to be fixed, because that's our identity. But to improve our efficiency, we have to automate the center 2 letters, orientate, decide. Those have to be automated. And the more you automate those 2, the more you become just elite.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm so glad that's going to be in the show notes. All right, Chris, last question, which I ask on every show. Is there anything that we have not talked about that you would like to share with our listeners?
I'll give you a quote that I absolutely love. And I think I would just like for everyone to just maybe think about this for a moment. But a famous philosopher, Carl Jung, he said that until we can make the unconscious part of our mind conscious, metacognition, until we can make the unconscious part of our mind conscious, it will control our lives, and we'll call it fate.
That's fabulous.
I would like to leave you with that thought. And then the advice, if I could give some advice, free advice and worth every penny, never withhold love if it's within your ability to give it.
Oh, that one resonates so well with me. I tell so many people that I love them because I genuinely do, and a lot of them are so uncomfortable with it, but I just do it anyway. Chris, your new book, The Mindset Book, a very simple title, but tell us what we might learn from it.
It's on Amazon, a paperback, Kindle, and now Audible. And I paid a professional narrator to narrate, but it's the book of mindset, and it's on Amazon. It's the 14th book that I've written over 25 years. And I would say that it's the one I'm most proud of.
Oh, that's saying something. I'm going to check that out and I'll have that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for this time today. It was fabulous. I know I learned a lot. I hope everybody listening did. And wishing you all the best, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Champions Mojo podcast. Would you consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple? That's like getting a best time for us. Kelly and our team would be so grateful. See you next week for another boost of mojo.